Okay. Okay. Thank you very much to all of you who are logging in. This presentation is called Success on the SAT and ACT, presented by me. My name is Alan Polito, and I am the Outreach Director for the Princeton Review. I work out of the Southern California office, so it's currently 10 a.m. Pacific time right now. You guys will have the ability to ask me questions. I will intermittently answer some of them depending on the flow of the presentation, and I will certainly leave some time for at the end of the presentation as well. If we do not get to any of your questions, or if you think of some questions after my presentation is over, you can take a look at my contact information, and here it is. Obviously, that's my email address, so be sure to take note of that, and you can send me any requests that you might have. Okay? As far as my background is concerned, I have worked for Princeton Review since 1997. So this is my 16th year working for the company. I started off, like many Princeton Review full-timers, as an instructor. I still currently teach and tutor, but that's very rare at this point. I'm mainly doing marketing and outreach, and I take care of about 80 high schools in the greater Orange County area in Southern California. Okay? Perfect. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we get into any of the hard-hitting and specific strategies and techniques to perform better on the SAT and ACT, I want to make sure that you guys have some fundamental knowledge about either exam. This is crucial, especially if some of the techniques I'm going to discuss today are going to make any sense to you guys. Okay? So the tests at a glance. Let's talk about the SAT first of all. Okay? Now, it is not crucial that you memorize this kind of stuff, unless, of course, you plan to be an instructor or somebody who talks about the SAT in greater detail, but it's just a good idea to kind of see what these tests look like, okay? So the SAT, as you can see, is 3 hours and 45 minutes long. That's nearly 4 hours, and that's quite a long time for anybody to take an exam. It doesn't matter if you're a high school student, college student, or a professional or a working adult. That's a very long time. There are 10 total sections, which include testing 3 major subjects, which are critical reading, math, and writing skills. As far as the scoring per section, is from a minimum 200 points to a maximum 800 points. So you get 200 points per section just for showing up and remembering your name and bubbling it in correctly. There is an essay section that's part of those 10 sections overall. It's the first thing that you will encounter, which is 25 minutes long. I will discuss the essay and tips for it later on. So Akila, I know you sent me something, but I will cover that later on when it's appropriate. So that's what the SAT looks like. And one of the things that I do want to stress from this particular slide is simply that this is an endurance test. If you are serious about preparing for either exam, SAT or ACT or both, you need to understand that you must take practice tests before you sit down to take the real thing. It is a foolish idea for you to believe that you're simply going to get up on that Saturday morning, get dressed, go to the test site, and take a 4-hour exam without ever having experienced that before. That would be like deciding you're going to run a 26-mile marathon the morning of, which is not smart. It doesn't matter how good you might be at running. Okay? For the ACT, this is what you get. So the ACT is 3 hours, and actually it should say 25 minutes there, I believe. There's about a 20-minute disparity between the two. Nonetheless, if we're going to be very detailed about it, yes, technically the ACT is just a bit shorter than the SAT is. And so that is actually one of the bragging rights and marketing ideas that ACT has, which is, hey, we're actually shorter than those other guys, our rival test. The 5 major sections and subjects that are tested on the ACT include English, math, reading, science, and the writing section. The writing section is basically still the essay section, but they decided to call it writing. The scoring grid on the ACT is very different. It's from a minimum of 1 point to a maximum of 36 points per section. And that is, of course, very different from what I just told you about the 200 to 800 points on the SAT. The average score for a high school junior on the ACT is approximately 21 points per section, or the composite, which is simply the average of the 4 subjects of English, math, reading, and science. I forgot to mention in the previous slide that the SAT, which is scored from 200 to 800 points per section, has an average of 500 points for a high school junior. How do these numbers correlate with possible college admissions? Now, I said the word possible because I want you to remember that colleges do not judge you simply by your SAT or ACT scores. They will look at other factors such as your GPA, your high school curriculum, the courses that you've taken, your extracurricular activities, when applicable, your personal statements or letters of recommendation. So this is just one factor that they will use to judge your eligibility. Having said that, as far as the average numbers are concerned, for the ACT, if you're scoring around 21 points, which is again average, that's right around state school level. Okay? How can you tell if it's a state school? Usually it has the word state in its name. That's a pretty good barometer for that. That's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty darn good. Whereas if you wanted to go into universities, you probably have to aim for at least mid-20s to qualify for what they are looking for. And if you want to shoot for the super competitive schools in the country, the Ivy League schools, the Harvards, okay, or then you're going to want to aim for 31 points or higher on the ACT. Similarly, on the SAT, if you're scoring around 500 points per section, then you're right around state school level. If you're shooting for universities, you want to shoot for about 600 points per section. And if you're trying to get into Ivy League level or super competitive schools, that's 700 points per section is what you're trying to achieve. Okay? Again, those are just average numbers. They're not predictions of whether you will or will not get in. Back to the SAT, okay? So what is actually tested on these 3 major subjects? I've shown them to you here. In the reading section, you have sentence completions, which is the portion that still tests some vocabulary, and it's a remnant from the previous version of the SAT. And you have passage-based reading, which is basically going to appear on every standardized test you could possibly take. Reading passages are always going to be there. Even if you want to be a doctor 10 years from now, you have to take a test that includes passage-based reading. You want to be a lawyer, you want to go to business school, you want to get a master's or a PhD, you will have to take a test with passage-based reading. The math on the SAT is actually not very difficult. If you take a look, it's Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, and Arithmetic. The most difficult concept in that list, obviously, is Algebra 2. But you may not know that there are only about 3 to 4 Algebra 2 based questions on the SAT math, and yes, they represent the hardest problems. For those of you who have never even broken 700 points out of 800 on the math, you have no business even worrying about Algebra 2. You need to get much better with your Algebra 1 geometry and arithmetic skills because those make up the majority of the math concepts that you will see. On the writing section, it's split up into 2 different parts. The grammar section, which is multiple choice, is about 70% of your writing grade, and the 25-minute handwritten essay that you will write on the SAT is about 30% of that grade. Needless to say, the essay, because it's so influential when it comes to the writing section, is one of the fastest ways to improve your writing score and your overall SAT score. On the ACT, okay, there are more things to say about the ACT, so I did not give you too many graphics. On the math side of the ACT, it is technically a more difficult test. So you can see that it includes all the concepts that the SAT math will test, but it adds trigonometry and some pre-calculus as well. And there's about 4 of those questions, okay? So that's what you get in the math. On the reading section, you will have long reading passages. I told you, every standardized test has long reading passages. The English will be multiple choice grammar. And the science or science reasoning will have charts and experiments. But there's actually no science content. That's one of the misconceptions about the ACT. For people who don't know any better or who have never taken a practice or real ACT, they see the subject science and they think, oh, so that means I need to bring in my biology knowledge, my AP chemistry knowledge, my AP physics or honors physics experience. That's not true. There's no content on the ACT. No content. So they will not ask you about the parts of a cell. They won't talk about the acceleration of gravity. They won't say 9.8 meters per second per second. They won't ask you to balance equations. Everything you have to know about solving a science passage is given to you on that paper. So that explains why the science section is easily one of the most confusing sections for first-time testers on the ACT. And of course, the writing section, which as we know is still just an essay, and this is a 30-minute essay experience, 5 minutes longer versus the SAT. Okay? So what's a good score in these tests? Well, I kind of gave you a breakdown there, but the average score is again around 500 points per section on the SAT, and it's 21 points again for juniors or 11th graders for the ACT. But a good score is the score that helps you get into your top choice college. It's obviously very different for every person applying to college in the United States, so you can't just say what a good score happens to be. My dream school might be Florida State. It might be Texas A&M. It might be TCU. It might be Cal State Fullerton or UC Berkeley or USC. It might be Harvard. It might be UPenn. It might be Penn State, Michigan, Michigan State. Okay, so you guys get the point. Different colleges look for different scores for admissions and for financial aid, and the higher your score, then obviously the more attractive you look as an applicant to these schools. They love high test scores, not because it predicts how well you're going to do in college. There's no information that supports that, but because high test scores, as advertised by colleges, is very attractive for families and students applying there, right? Let's be honest. When your parents see college rankings or they see how high the average advertised GPA or test scores are for each school, they immediately think, oh, that must be a good school, which is not really a very complete way of looking at it, but that's the reality of how college is perceived today. Okay? So what do these tests actually measure? They basically measure how well you take the SAT and ACT. They have no correlation, as I mentioned, with how you're going to do in the future, and they certainly have no correlation with how you're doing now in high school. If you don't believe me, talk to every high school student out there who has a 4.0 GPA or higher. You would expect that somebody getting straight A's in high school is simply going to do very well on the SAT and ACT. But if you actually took the time to survey those students, and if they're being honest with you, you would quickly find out that there is no relationship between good grades in high school and good test scores or high test scores on these exams. Most people are not very good and are not very comfortable at testing. A small percentage of the country is okay and comfortable with that, okay? So make sure you understand that most people are not very good at these tests, and it's not your fault because most of the country is like that. Don't take your test scores personally because they do not measure your intelligence. But with proper coaching, especially from, of course, somebody like me or from Princeton Review, wherever you are in the country, you can learn how to increase your test scores. Okay? So in this slide, why do students struggle with the SAT or ACT? These tests are very different from the tests that you take in high school, and therefore you need to change your approach when it comes to these exams, okay? Unless you're getting a perfect test score on the SAT or ACT the first time you take it, I'm pretty much sure that most of you listening to this have room for improvement, okay? Otherwise you wouldn't be here. So how are they different from how you are tested in school? Number one, the tests are long. The only thing that's comparable to a full-length SAT or ACT would be an AP exam or an IB level exam for you. And you only take those once a year, pretty much. So the tests are very long, and even your finals and midterms in high school are no match for the breadth of these exams. It's a 4-hour test, I mentioned, right? The SAT especially is written to trick students. The answer choices are filled with common traps. So the SAT is more of a tricky exam, and one reason for that is that because the SAT tests easier concepts, they will make the situation seem more difficult. So instead of just giving you a straightforward math word problem, they'll give you these convoluted, confusing situations. So they'll talk about Jane getting on an airplane at 5 p.m. Pacific time going at 350 miles per hour, and Joey getting on a train at 9:30 p.m. East Coast time going 125 miles per hour. They travel towards each other. They both toss potatoes up in the air. Where do the potatoes land in what time zone, right? That's an SAT style question. It's a simple mathematical process, but the situation given to you is tricky. Another reason is that the grammar, which is tested by both of these exams, has very little emphasis in most schools. Let's face it, grammar school is like in elementary school. You don't really study grammar, especially at the high school level. You're just sort of expected to know it. And in today's day and age, with technology and texting and Skyping and Facebooking and comment threads and everything else out there, grammar is pretty much non-existent for most of you high school age students, right? Some of you think ludicrous is spelled with a K. You think LOLs is actually a real word. You actually believe the statement would of. That's WOULDOF, would of. Guys and girls, that's not a real phrase. It's would have. There's no such thing. And there is not should of, it's should have. I can't believe how many times I see that. Okay? Math tested is content students learned in middle school and forgot. So for a lot of you, the irony is that the better you are in math on the SAT, and the better you are in math in high school, the worse off you are for the SAT and ACT because they don't test very difficult math concepts. And the essay writing, that's not usually something that's timed in school. Most English teachers don't say, you have 25 minutes, write me a 5-paragraph essay right now, okay? That includes thinking time. So you need to prepare for those things. Okay? So let's do a little drill here. Are you an average Joe or Joanna? You guys have 3 seconds to pick a number. Just keep it to yourself. Okay? And obviously we're online. Okay, so it's not as if you can shout it out anyway. So I bet that for those of you who did choose to pick a number, most of you chose a number between 1 and 10. Maybe even from 1 to 5. You could have picked any number, but most of you may not have said 3/4 or -6 or pi or 1,567,232, whatever, okay? So that simple exercise is to show you that most people are very predictable, okay? And so the test writers use that predictability. They actually take in psychologists to help design these exams because they want to be able to predict behavior so that they can design the test around that. Why would they be doing that? Simple. It's because they want to be able to keep your scores low. Why would they want to keep your scores low? You pay $50 every time you take these exams, right? So if you take the test for the first time and you don't get the score that you want, guess what? You and your parents just shell out another $50 and you take it again and again and again and again. So it behooves them. It's beneficial to them for you to take it more than once, especially if you're not getting the score that you like. Okay? So because you're predictable, they know which wrong answer choices you like, and they put them there on purpose. That's one of the ways they can use a multiple choice exam against you. Okay? What are some differences between these two exams? Well, one of them is that the SAT tests vocabulary and the ACT does not, okay? And I mentioned that before with a section called sentence completions. A very quick word about SAT vocabulary, okay? A lot of students, and especially parents, moms especially, moms are pretty much mostly in charge of this process, okay? So parents, moms, tend to really, really embrace vocabulary memorization for the SAT, and even students who don't know any better. So I have met, in 16 years of teaching, obviously, I've met thousands of different students, and I've been exposed to different personality types and sort of plans that they've got. And I can tell you that most SAT students who prepare for this exam spend way too much time memorizing vocabulary. Now, before I get ahead of myself, I'm not telling you to drop vocabulary altogether. There's a place and a time for it, okay? What I am saying is that many of you, especially your parents, stress vocab memorization way too much. And so you've got these parents who come home with 3 to 4 dictionaries, SAT vocab calendars, word of the day, 5,000 flashcards, and they drill that incessantly with their students. And one of the reasons that they do that is that vocabulary memorization is one of the few things a parent can still embrace understand, and measure today. If you ask a parent to help their 16-year-old improve reading comprehension, they pretty much draw a blank stare and they quietly think to themselves, oh, I wish I'd read to my daughter for the last 16 years, okay? But vocab memorization and flashcards, that's very easy to hang on to. So mom, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Gonzalez, they can be at Starbucks with their friends and say, you know what I did this weekend? I locked my son inside his bedroom. I gave him no food and no drink, no water, and I made him memorize 855 vocab flashcards. I'm such a good mom, okay? And I hope most of you don't have that experience, but I'm sure some of you are nodding and going, yes, my mom does that to me, okay? So it's easy for them to embrace it because it's something they can measure. They can say, you memorized 3 words this week or 300 words this week. When the reality is that on the SAT, there are almost three times more reading questions than there are vocab questions, and they both influence the reading score. So if you are truly serious about improving your reading score, whatever time you spend memorizing vocab, multiply that by 3. So if you study for 100 minutes for vocab memorization, you'd better follow it up directly with 300 minutes of reading comprehension. Most of you don't know that, and I bet most of you don't do that, okay? The ACT has a science section, and of course that means that the SAT does not. I already talked about why the science section is very strange, because it doesn't really test science. The SAT essay is required. It's given as the first section on the test. The ACT essay is optional and given to you at the end. You can actually get up and leave and not finish or do the 30-minute ACT essay. Our advice from Princeton Review is simple. If you spent 3 hours sitting down for the ACT and you've got to choose if you're going to stay to take it or leave, take it. You never know when you or your friends change their minds about the colleges they're applying to, and you don't want to miss out on the ACT essay because you left early just to save yourself 30 minutes of testing. Because if you need to take the ACT essay and you change your mind by wanting to go to a university or a private school, and those require the essay section, then you have to sit down and take the whole thing again. You don't want to do that. The SAT essay is more philosophical, whereas the ACT essay is more teenage friendly. So a philosophical SAT essay example would be something that says like, how do you feel about the notion that people often cause their own problems? So that's sort of a very deep question, kind of like something you would read in a fortune cookie somewhere, right? Whereas the ACT essay is very teenage friendly, almost sort of watered down. So an ACT essay prompt might say, is wearing seatbelts a good idea? Or how do you feel about wearing high school uniforms? Okay, so fundamentally very different in their delivery. And finally, I've alluded to this many times now, but the SAT is a trickier exam because it tests easier concepts, but the ACT is a harder exam by concept, but it's more straightforward. Hence, the ACT looks and feels more like a high school exam. Students who tend to have good GPAs tend to do better on the ACT. Finally, the SAT is more technique-based, and the ACT is more content-based. Okay, so some more traits here as we segue and we get closer to some more of the very specific techniques and details. How are the tests scored? For the SAT, these are the raw point requirements that they have, right? Raw points indicate how many questions actually exist. Right? You're not answering 800 questions. We all know that. So they change it using a scale. But for the raw points on the SAT, you get a question right, it's +1. You leave it blank, it's 0. But if you get it wrong, it's -1/4 of a point. Another way to say that is every 4 wrong answers, every 4 takes away 1 correct one. Okay? So you need to understand, how does that affect your performance? Do not guess randomly on the SAT. If you can't eliminate any incorrect choices, just leave it blank. But the ACT is exactly the opposite. On the ACT, you'll notice that if you leave it blank or you get it wrong, it's just 0 points. There's no penalty. What that means is you should guess on any questions that you don't know how to work through. I'm missing a word there. We call it letter of the day. You pick one letter and you bubble straight down. That's if you've run out of time and you're panicking on an ACT section. Never ever leave an ACT problem blank. That's very different, obviously, between the two. So if you're going to guess on the SAT, guess if you can eliminate at least one, two incorrect answer choices, one or two. If you're a bad guesser, I prefer two so that you're just guessing among three different choices. As I mentioned, always guess on the ACT if you couldn't work it out. Okay, so now to some more of the specific strategies out there. So imagine you're driving a car down the freeway. I'm sure some of you already have your licenses, some of you have your permits, and some of you are still begging your parents to allow you to drive, okay? So imagine you're driving a car down the freeway. And while you're driving, okay, you're listening to the radio, and suddenly whatever you're listening to is interrupted by the radio announcer, the DJ, okay? And he says, there's an accident that has just occurred 2 miles from where you are currently driving. You're headed towards the accident, and it has blocked all the lanes, and there's no way through it, okay? What is something that you would do in that situation? Think about that for a second. So if you're a responsible driver, you might have said, you know, maybe I am going to find an exit and get an alternate route, okay, and take some side streets or take a different freeway. Good. Others might say, I would prepare to slow down, okay, and make sure that I hover over the brakes and get ready to slow down. And yes, there's a couple of you guys who are a little bit special who are thinking, oh no, I would go 120 miles per hour and go crash right into it, okay? Don't do that. That was bad, okay? But so the appropriate response is to pace yourself, is to slow down, especially when you know there's something bad that's going to occur down the road. So there's a visual image of what I just described. How does this apply to the tests? For many of the sections on these exams, the problems get more difficult as you progress. Another way to say that is that the higher the number of the problem, typically the more difficult it is, okay? So what that means for you is that you're kind of like that car, or driving that car, hearing that there's an accident, or in this case a brick wall down the road, but for many of you, all you do is speed through. How do I know that? Because for many of you, your natural tendency is when you sit down to take any test, you believe you're supposed to finish the exam. And that kind of makes sense because that is how you have been taught in high school. That's how you've been taught to basically approach any exam. That's typically a bad strategy on SAT or ACT because, as I just said, the problems get more difficult. And here's the kicker. They're all worth the same value. So that hardest problem you spent 5 minutes solving, it was worth the same number of points versus number one. So there's no sense for a lot of you to try to finish and rush this just to get to the hardest problems, which most of you get wrong anyway. On the SAT, when you get something wrong, they penalize you. On the ACT, even if they don't penalize you, you're wasting crucial time by rushing to get to the hardest problems. So you need to pace yourself and to slow down. So mathematically, here is what that actually means for you. Okay, so they're worth the same number of points. Most students should slow down rather than speed up. On the SAT, if you have never scored 650 points or higher on one given section, not your total, just for the section itself, you've never scored 650 or higher, you should pace yourself. You should actually slow down and do fewer problems. You are hurting your score by rushing through the whole thing. It's like magic. You skip a couple to several problems and avoid the incorrect penalty. Your score actually goes up, as strange as that sounds, okay? On the ACT, if you're not scoring 27 or 28 points or higher, you should not be rushing through the whole thing. Now, remember a few slides ago, I said never leave an ACT problem blank. So how do you reconcile these two things? Well, if you have 20 questions on an ACT, for example, what you can do is, let's say you only try to solve problems 1 through 15, but leave yourself maybe 20 to 30 seconds to bubble in some kind of letter for the last few ACT. So that means you still didn't waste time trying to solve the hardest ACT problems and rushing your way towards that accident or that brick wall. Okay, so it's a very powerful technique. It's actually a strategy. Strategy is something that applies to the overall method in which you attack the test, whereas a technique is something that can be applied to specific problems. So moving on to the next slide. Imagine you're at the candy store. Okay, you're at the candy store, and you guys should just kind of quietly follow along as you're listening to this. Okay, and let's pretend we're at the candy store, and I want to buy some candy. That's obviously why I'm in the candy store. I want to buy some sour belts today. I'm going to buy the green ones. Okay, they're very good. So today they cost 10 cents a piece. I'm going to buy 6 pieces. I give the clerk $1. How much change do I get back? And if you're following along, it should be 40 cents. I go back the following day. I want to buy some red sour belts. For some reason, they're more expensive. They cost 25 cents a piece. I'm going to buy 3 pieces. I give the clerk $1. How much change do I get back? You should have thought 25 cents. I go back one more time, and for some reason, something has changed for the third when I go back the third time. This time, they cost X cents a piece. I want to buy Y pieces. I'm going to give them Z dollars. How much change do I get back? Some of you intrepid listeners out there might have said Z minus XY, but you would have forgotten to convert dollars and cents, so you would have needed to say Z over 100 minus XY. For many of you, let's be honest, you didn't solve it. You sat there and your brains said, wait a minute, say that again, or can you put that up on the screen? I need pencil and paper. Where's my calculator? Your brain hit the brakes because it needed to access a different part to solve the third situation that was no different except for the fact that I took out the numbers you like and I put in the letters called variables in algebra. It's the same thing. One of the ways they make these tests more difficult is by simply giving you algebraic situations rather than actual numbers. If you told your friend today, hey man, remember you owe me $5, you better pay me back in 3 days, otherwise I will kick you 6 times. That's a pretty clear message. Your friend should know what to do in that situation. But if you approach your friend and instead you said, hey, remember you owe me X dollars. If you don't pay me back in Y days, I'm going to hit you Z times. That's still a very vague threat, you understand? And so we don't want to deal with vagueness on the SAT or the ACT. So we use a technique in Princeton Review called plugging in. There's my sour belts, okay? We use a technique called plugging in, which takes away the algebra and puts in real numbers. So which is easier for your brain to think about? I don't care if you are Ms. or Mr. Algebra of your high school, okay? Your brain is better at 2 plus 10 versus the equation on the left-hand side, okay? It would be very strange if you were weaker with 2 plus 10. So this is an idea I'm simply introducing. Since this isn't actually a classroom, I don't have drills for you guys to do, but I'm introducing this idea. When you see variables in the word problem, specifically in the answer choices, that is a huge clue to know that you should plug in for that problem. And instead of dealing with X's, Y's, and Z's, simply make up your own numbers. Yes, make them up yourself. As long as they fit the requirements of the word problem and situation, you're okay. So if it says Farmer Bob has X dogs, maybe you say Farmer Bob has 5 dogs. Don't say 0 dogs or 1/2 dogs or pi dogs. That would be very strange again. Okay, pick numbers that make your life easy and make the word problem believable. Okay, so that's the idea. How effective is plugging in? It will work on about 30% of the math problems on either exam. That's very effective. If I had only 1 hour to teach every high school student in America how to get better in math on the SAT or ACT, this is a concept that I would teach. Plugging in is a better, faster method to solve math problems. Quick digression here. When I first when I attended college, I was a math major. So you'd have to believe I'm pretty good at math, okay? Now, when I attack SAT or ACT problems, do I solve them the way a math major would? No. I use plugging in because I know it's a faster way to do it. Okay? Even though I can do it conventionally, there are no moral victories to this test. Okay? I don't let my ego and my pride get in the way of making my math teacher proud. Okay? That doesn't matter. They don't give you credit for work. Okay? It's all about getting the right letter, and that's it. Let's talk about the reading section for both test types. Here is what the typical tester looks like during the reading section. Okay? And there's a picture of a frustrated student because most people hate the reading section. There's a few that do like it, okay, but most of you don't like it. One of the reasons is you feel like, well, at least in the math or the science section, you're doing something, right? Your calculator is there to help you out, to bail you out in case you have problems. But in the reading section, most of you are like, well, it's boring and I'm just going to read these passages that I don't want to read, and I'm not doing much of anything. Okay, so some strategies for you guys to think about in the reading section. You need to identify and be honest with your reading style. Okay, for some of you, you're very good at reading. You get A's in English and literature classes, and you're probably in the advanced honors or AP level classes. If that's you, you're a very good reader, you're a very efficient reader, and therefore you should read the passage from top to bottom. You'll spend only a couple of minutes doing so, and you will retain a great deal of information. Okay? Sorry about that. Still on reading style. If you're an average reader, how can we tell? You get B's and C pluses in your English classes. You should probably skim the passages instead. Maybe read every other sentence or the first and last sentence of the passages. And finally, if you're a very poor reader, okay, you're getting D's, C minuses. Heck, you're getting an F in English class, okay? In that case, then maybe you shouldn't try to read the passages at all. Go straight to the questions. And the reason for that, you're just wasting your time, okay? You'll spend too much time reading the passage and you're not comprehending what you're reading. You need to learn to rephrase the questions. For the test, a lot of the questions they ask you in the reading section are not actually questions. Most of them don't have question marks. They're mostly incomplete statements, right? So they'll sound something like, the author mentions the flock of seagulls in lines 52 to 65 in order to. That's sort of what they sound like. You cannot let them get away with that. That is meant to confuse you. So how do you rephrase the questions? You use one of three beginnings. What, why, how. You must practice this skill. When you read one of those statements, you mentally rephrase it. When you're just beginning to practice this, go ahead and write it out on the paper that you are practicing on. So my example, the author mentions the flock of seagulls in lines 52 to 65 in order to. I might say instead, why does the author mention flock of seagulls? This is something you must practice. Do not attempt this the day of the exam if you have not practiced it. You will not do very well. Active reading when searching for the answer. For many of you, if I took a look at your test booklet, let's say you took a practice test or you ordered the official one from them, okay? If I look at the reading section, most of you would have very clean reading sections. It means you wrote nothing down. That's poor testing. You need to be active. You need to underline, you need to cross out, you need to star, you need to circle, put notes, especially in the reading passage where you believe you've found the correct answers. Mapping the passage basically means that there's a rough chronological order to what they're asking you in these passages. So if you're solving question number 15, write Q15 on the margins somewhere next to approximately where you found the correct answer. Because if question 16 does not tell you which line to go to, it will likely appear beneath the area where you found the answer to question 15. That's called mapping the passage. And of course, eliminate incorrect answers. Most of you understand the concept of process of elimination. Most of you don't actually use it. It's a visual aid to you, okay? It's a confidence booster for you to see that you are actually crossing out incorrect answer choices. So you want to cross them out on your answer sheet, on your test booklet, so it will help you out. Okay. Next one, the essays. Now, my tips on the essays for the SAT and the ACT are specific just to these essays. These are not for essays in high school class. These strategies do not work for college essays or personal statements, okay? This is specifically for the essays because these are strange exams and they look at them in a certain kind of way. So here's some strategies for you to think about. Okay? The length of your writing is actually important. You're given 2 pages of lined paper, 2 pages. So you will want to finish at least a page and a half to 2 pages. Okay? If you're writing a page or less, you will never get close to a perfect score on these essays. And that's because to them, more writing means more effort. That's what it is. They're only spending about 2 to 3 minutes grading these essays, and so your first impression is your last impression. You may not know this, but after they scan your essay paper and it's emailed to 2 separate graders somewhere in the country, when they read page 1, they go on to page 2. When they go to page 2, they go on to the scoring screen. They cannot go back to pages 1 and 2. So they can't even look back at what you've written. They have to grade it depending on how they feel at that exact moment. Number 2, because these are both handwritten essays for both SAT and ACT, your neatness is still going to count. So if you have very bad handwriting, you write like a doctor, you need to try to fix that, at least for the SAT or ACT essay component, okay? If you write poorly and they cannot read what you've written, of course they're going to penalize you. Okay? They may not say it out loud, but that's what they're thinking. Imagine yourself. Have you ever seen a letter or notes on a paper or something somebody gave to you, handwritten, and you couldn't read it? Did you ever think to yourself, I cannot read what this person wrote. He or she must be very intelligent. Okay? Nobody thinks that. So don't give them a reason to mark you down any less. You need to organize your essay. This isn't a blog. This isn't a comment thread on YouTube, okay? You need to organize your essays, and you need to have separate paragraphs that basically show the different ideas and support evidence that you are providing. And make sure that your indentations are all lined up together to show organization. You need to answer the question. This is one of the most common flaws for young high school writers. Answer the question that's given to you. Many of you get so carried away by the evidence that you came up with, especially because you might be excited that you actually thought of something that makes sense for the prompt given to you. So you spend all your time summarizing what that is. So if you want to talk about World War II and the attack on Pearl Harbor, a lot of you guys will basically summarize the whole thing and talk about all the details. It's not important for you to summarize the event or the book or the scientific occasion that you are talking about. Okay, it's important to you to discuss why you are including it in there. So even if you're talking about a book, you need to assume that the person has read the book. That person has a PhD, and I'm pretty sure they've read a lot more books than you have, especially if you're referencing something from high school, okay? So make sure you answer the question that way. Akila, this is the perfect segue for your early question before, which is, are historical scientific examples preferred to personal experiences? The answer is yes. If you can avoid personal experiences and go with something more historical, scientific, or something from literature, you should try to do that. You are trying to impress college-educated adults. So your personal experience of being broken up with a week before the prom, okay, is not going to be that significant an experience to them. It'll be very difficult to impress somebody with teenage personal experiences. However, if the prompt is very specific and a personal anecdote is going to be helpful, of course you should write about it, okay? You must use your mind, you must use your common sense and judgment depending on what you are being asked, okay? Writing something, even if it's a personal experience, is better than writing nothing. Okay? And of course, you must always finish, and the way to ensure that you finish on the real thing is to practice it. If you've never experienced a 25 to 30-minute essay experience, including reading a prompt and thinking about it, you must do it. You must drill and practice this stuff before you take the real thing. That's very crucial. So that means if you're going to finish, you have to have a conclusion, okay? You have to have a conclusion, and do not simply write, sorry, ran out of time. We've seen that before, and they don't laugh and reward you because you're being very cool and smart. No, they say, okay, you didn't do the job, so I'm going to grade you down as well. Okay? So those are some tips that I have for the essays. Great. Some reminders here for you guys is that one of the questions that arises from this type of presentation is, if we're comparing SAT and ACT, some of you might be wondering which test is better for you. Princeton Review has a free practice test that we can administer. It's a Princeton Review assessment or a combination test. And if you want, contact your local Princeton Review office or contact me so I can get you in touch with those people. And we can determine which test is better for you. There's no need to guess, okay? We actually have, you get two different results and we can tell you mathematically which test is better. By the way, another question that arises a lot of times, depending on which part of the country you're at, is that your region probably has a preference. Here in California, we're very much SAT based. That's also true if you're on the East Coast. If you're in the Midwest and the South, you're more ACT based, okay? So that's just a geographical thing. That has nothing to do with colleges. It's just marketing dollars. Understand that all colleges accept either test. They all accept either test. They only care about the score that you get, not the test type that you are turning in. And every student can improve significantly on these tests with the right instruction techniques and materials. And certainly, if you're looking for preparation, obviously I'm biased. I work for Princeton Review and I've done so for 16 years. You'd have a very difficult time finding somebody with that much continuous experience with the same company. That's how much I believe in what we do. Okay? Here's my contact information. If there are any of you listening to this and have questions right now, you are absolutely welcome to type in questions. So go ahead. Okay? Give you guys some seconds there. Okay? Usually you guys would have been typing questions already, but I didn't receive anything else. So let me see if there's anything further. Okay? Okay. Okay. I don't really see anything else popping up at this point. Okay? And so make sure that you copy down my email address. You guys are more than welcome to contact me, and I'm very happy to give you some advice. And if it's more fitting for a local Princeton Review representative to talk to you, then certainly I would defer you to that person. That 800 phone number should automatically connect you to your local Princeton Review center. Okay. Thank you so much for those of you who attended this seminar, and I wish you guys good luck in your testing. Bye-bye now.